You may or may not know me. I gotta plug such podcasts as the Frogger 45 on AFP 548, the book that I did with Charles Edge, co-authored. I was able to do for Pact Publishing on iOS security, more contact info, dem Twitters. I'm not really an author or a radio personality or a performer or singer. I think I'm trying to play my position though, right? So the link father is to FileVault 2 as I'm turning in to the Osquery talk giver. Hopefully there's enough new material this time around in comparison to last month when I gave a talk on Osquery and the month before that when I gave a talk on Osquery. Just trying to give us some exclusives, however. I've been somewhat regularly involved with the auto package project as well. I gave a presentation on it called Beyond the Basics in 2014 for Mac Tech Conference, where I earned such rave reviews as I didn't quote what Joe Chilcote actually also said in here, which is a half hour, and he goes, I think I know less about auto package than I knew half an hour ago. And this was the real piece de resistance right here. This one. Regular adulation, right? I guess I'm glad I'm not presenting in front of Mike Arpaia and Teddy Reed, who are the lead developers on Osquery, or had been. In any case, God save you all, and good luck. Thanks to Professor Xavier, not just for having me, but especially because he didn't freak out when I said, I'm replacing the coffee in this talk, this regular coffee, with Folgers crystals. I'm going to slip in an entirely different talk. Between the Osquery stuff, it's not just because I was running low on material. And that's the one that I've been giving informally in conversation for years, the thesis of which is Japan. Now, because they have a lot of the same stuff that we have, they're just doing it differently. Like they listen to drum and bass in the supermarket. Like, I don't know why. Like in the countryside. It's pretty damn cool. I've been going there for like 15-plus-ish years regularly. I'll be talking about the Japanese language in particular. So you guys are going to need to pay attention because there will be audience participation regularly throughout the talk. So please stay with me if you would. Domo, somi-san. So I am not going to give any of this presentation in Japanese. This will be about Japanese. Okay, so on focus. Okay. There's things that I won't be going, considering I've given 2 presentations on them already, and I don't want to for anyone who happened to have been, made to watch those things, like Clockwork Orange with their eyelids held open. So I'm just going to point to some of those references. I had that handout that I spoke to previously. This, if you're not in the Slack, is a short URL to where that is. Last month, I went over selling Osquery to your security department if you're an organization that needs to do those sort of things. For the University of Utah, they had me, the J. Marriott Library. They Skyped me in to be able to talk about that. I've been able to, with my security organization, sell them on Sal, Monkey, and Crypt. I've delegated in a repo called AOS White Papers, those security-focused white papers, so that if you're having a difficulty or you want to have like a 4-pager of very executive summary type things to get your security department to evaluate Osquery, this might help you out. That was last month. The month before that, I went over some integration points between Python and Osquery, as there is a plugin that would therefore allow you to take advantage of it from Python. Now, there is a very specific setup workflow you'd go through with very common ways of deploying Osquery involving logging. And so I've been over and over again saying, hey, logging, I'm going to get to that at MacDevOpsYVR. You guys ready for it? Actually not. So the logging part was better covered, as in the handout, by Dan Griggs of Command Security. He was talking about specifically ASL. So he says, hey, here's how it currently works. 10.11.5, here's what you can do to get logs shipped from a Mac. And so MacDMV, Mr. Tom Bridge recorded that, and it's up on the Vimeo. There's also a link to the WWDC presentation, which you may want to notice, like Santa has a issue that they've logged as a enhancement request for them to say, hey, you know what, ASL is kind of slow. We're using this plain text format. And you might notice when you sometimes just send stuff to standard out when you're running a command that things are actually slower than when you run it without that verbosity. It's because ASL can kind of, any kind of textual representation that you have to do is extra work for the system. In WWC, they announced something that may or may not be of interest to you if you're specifically concerned with logging. So pardon me that I won't be going over those because I really want to get to this Japanese stuff. So, okay is for orchestra. Okay, so they took okay, they took the word orchestra, they shortened it because everything when you shorten it is hip, right? They use acronyms like TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, right? You shorten it, it's hip. So this is a syllabary, one of the 3 alphabets that's specifically for phonetic translations or for phonetic representations of Japanese. And kara over here means empty. So karaoke means like you walk into this room and it's empty besides the orchestra and you're supposed to sing along to it. So karaoke. And kara is, commonly I would hear it where you're saying kara kara means that you're thirsty, means that your throat is empty. And so kara kara is a onomatopoeia, which I just learned has a T in it. Thank you for this presentation, for making me research that. So onomatopoeia, there's a bunch of them in Japanese for describing common things like, for example, heavy rain is za za. Like light rain, like drizzling, is pots pots, you know. Pots, pots. Like muddy stuff, it's very wavy. It looks even like dirtier with the waviness of the, sorry. Doro doro, that's what that is. And this one, it's not actually onomatopoeia, but it kind of sounds like it. And it's one of my, early on, it was one of my favorite words. Like your earlobe, like a small part, right? That you would use this word to describe a small part. And the word is buben. How awesome is that? Like, how can you not say buben and not like smile? Oh, kono buben. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. No, I got more Japanese for you people. So, anyone know what this word is for in Japanese? This is, of course, the Roman.
Chicken. Martinis.
Kukuriko is a rooster, yes. That is the sound that a rooster would make. Give that man a toaster. I have no toasters. One, it is not the opposite of lan. One. Anyone knows? Same animal theme? I do not know why a dog goes wan, but that's what they hear. So, Japanese, other dimension, different stuff going on. I should actually maybe go back to some technical content. Okay. So, here is the nickel tour. I actually needed to go through a more concrete and complete description. At Philly, I didn't really go through everything to help people understand what Osquery was about. So, we start with, all right, you've got this package. It's a client-side tool. There's a set of 2 binaries right here. Yes, this is going to be too small. If you have the slides that I posted in Slack as well for the PDF, you can pull that up if you would like. I don't know what page we're on. The other things that it does is it sets up some directory structure, but you'll notice there's nothing in launch daemons, there's nothing in launch agents, there's nothing about real persistence on the machine. You don't need root to take advantage of most of this. And the install makes no assumptions regarding your deployment or your idea of how you're going to then take advantage of it. So it has no install scripts as well. The project page, you can see the other end of that CI that we just saw from Osquery, that I'm not sure why they're not really paying attention to 10.9 anymore, but I'm assuming that it's 100% supported, as is Ubuntu 12. There's only 230 folks total at time of that screenshot. It's very quiet. But this is the official GitHub repo. On the Slack instance, Facebook's C-level security czar hangs out sometimes. It's always kind of like the fuzz or like, oh, mom's here. But I'm not sure if that's like an endorsement or something when your CISO just hangs out in Slack. But when it comes to the tool itself, how it is written, Osquery, C++ is the joke. As security of Mac OS was a priority when they started the project, it therefore holds a central focus. It officially supports Debian Enterprise Linux variants, as well as macOS with Windows support coming sometime soon. And other distros, I think FreeBSD, there might be some community activity around that as well. It has been the subject of external audits, also linked on that worksheet when it comes to code review quite specifically. I thought it was very cool that in this, like, if you're not into C++, reading a code review of C++ code in a modern style is not necessarily going to be all that interesting to you. However, there was footnotes that were links to specific commits on GitHub. And that's kind of cool, like line numbers, you know? It feels modern. It feels like right, like correct. And it's out in the open for you to review where experts pointed to what modern C++ code should look like. That's nice. It's just not just a nice to have. It's open, and it therefore engenders some trust, I believe. Now, it's a bit of an oversimplistic comparison, like the gentleman was saying, Instagram for crappy drivers or something. Was that what the build buddy gentleman was saying? How was previously? Yes. Hi. Domo. Sumimasen. Now, I don't really want to make comparisons, like it's Uber for neti pots or something like that. The closest cool tool conceptually, just for you to wrap your brain around, it's like Puppet's Factor, which is also written in C++, and it's used for information gathering. But for Factor, it's more about feeding the decisions that Puppet needs to make, knowing conditionally how it's supposed to behave with affecting change. Whereas Osquery is 100% audit. You can pipe other things to or from it, but I will come back to those decisions you can make with it in a few bullets. What makes the design kind of crazy, and I would think to most people on first glance that are not into SQL in general, or mess around with that, is that it groups classes of things that you'd commonly report on as SQL tables. And it actually relies on SQLite 3 to the point that they push the spec forward in terms of performance, in terms of behavior, because they're using it to extents that, I mean, even though Apple uses SQLite all over the place in databases on disk, they have quite specific and different requirements. So when you want to interact with Osquery, you're actually writing SQL that does queries on specialized, specially organized instrumented tables of often security-specific auditing data. Firewall, SIP, launch jobs, kernel extensions, host file contents, etc. And some of those you'll do rich filtered or focused lookups by using the SQL concept of joining. For example, you can join the file vol encryption table against the mount table if you only care about the boot volume. Or for apps you'd find in the users, libraries, app support folder, you can join against the users table to enumerate terrible stuff like zoom.us. Are we not non-binary men and women? We are DEVO, D-E-V-O. Let's do a quick demo. It's being built with love at Facebook. So you're now using a in-memory virtual database, essentially, because when it runs, it's going to do ad hoc retrieval of stuff. This is what I do every single time I'm going in here and I'm trying to remember what's specific to the platform that I have access to / from the version of Osquery that I'm running. So this gives me a whole bunch of output. You wouldn't realize until you actually start looking at XProtect reports that sometimes things are being flagged and you did not realize that. They were being quarantined and you did not know that. So this is where these things would be logged. There are obviously a good number of them, and keychain items, all of these things, very useful. Does anyone want to expose my OPSEC and have me run a query of something? Anything in particular people are into? How about we select star from SIP? Do I got SIP? That's going to be a lot. Where? No, not even. Not even. This is live demo time, right? There's really data in there, I swear. OK, so for example, I don't know why VirtualBox is still on my launch agents, but it is. So that is the quickest thing ever. There's only one concept that I wanted to cover. Oh, by the way, for help, you almost always want to use the line output when it comes to mode to clean this stuff up so you don't have these weird columns all over the place. It's trying to give you this graphic representation of rows and columns, but line, if you only have a few things that you know you're getting to, is a really cleaned up version. So there's the concept, thankfully handed down to me by Scott Roberts of GitHub as he was announcing a product around it that they worked on with Heroku, which is haystack versus needle. Do you want the entire haystack and then you're going to look through it? Or I only care if there's this one needle, because there's one needle I don't want to get stuck with. So you can derive your queries from that type of mindset. Do I want to select all and just check against a whitelist, for example? If all this is good, I don't need to report on it at all. Or if you ever turn gosh darn gatekeeper off again, why? Like, I'm going to come after you. That is one of those needle type actions. So those are the two general categories of queries you might use when building up your repertoire of things that are important to your organization. Demo over. And back to Japanese. So, 2 bullets to go, actually, in the nickel tour. But anyway, this is your chance for audience participation again. This is how you refer to a part-time gig in Japan, arubaito. How do you think, because remember I said that shortening stuff is hip, how do you think they shorten this word when they're referring to it? Baito. This guy knows all of the Japanese. It's almost like it's good. that $5 US that I slept in really came in handy, didn't it? Obviously, I didn't know what the exchange rate was, right? So perhaps Henry and Andy could actually also know it's Arbeit is the German that is from. It is just generically work. It is where that word comes from. Yet they only refer to it in terms of like fast food jobs and stuff like that, like where you need a lot of labor that you'll be advertising for. Back to the tour. Don't worry. We're just going to keep ping-ponging the entire presentation. Isn't this wonderful? So I told you that it's SQL statements that you use to interact with Osquery. Where do they get piped through? How do you actually get the results? Is you'll either do them on demand when you're building up queries, as I just ran with Osquery I, or you'll put a launch daemon to control it, to wrap it with Osquery D. There is also a Python module that you can use not only as a plugin to generate new tables of information that Osquery otherwise wouldn't know about, and therefore be able to use the same tool set to report on, but you can also open up an instance of Osquery D with a whole bunch of queries and just shove them all down the pipe at once, which is super efficient because, number one, SQL in general does not care about concurrency from the outside, right? You don't need to worry necessarily about hitting a database. It's the point of a database. It will lock just the rows and specific cells and such for that type of performance that you need. So you just shove down as many as you want. We'll make more. You're going to be optimized for as much RAM or CPU as you throw at it. The Osquery team keeps an eye on their CI when it comes to their profiling tools for performance. They want to make sure that none of their queries that they allow in core are going to negatively impact the system when it comes to resources. Now, the original title, really audit like you mean it. I thought that was better somehow, but I'm not sure. So no, like Osquery, it didn't happen. We'll consider that one the one that we went with. There is a common dilemma. So Osquery, it didn't happen. How do I, if I'm running repeated checks like Casper does sometimes, and sometimes actually successfully sends to a server, and sometimes successfully reports on, the common dilemma might be, in between those scheduled runs, how do we know that things didn't happen? And then, let me put all the furniture back in place. It's like we were never here. How do you actually know that those things might have happened if they're that important for you to track? And that is that the agent of Osquery can slurp off data in a low resource enough way that doesn't noticeably impact the system. And like this was specifically built to be under developers' laptops. And those people, they count every kilobyte coming out of the machine. They count every CPU that you're not using to, I don't know, stream Spotify. The way that they do that when they're streaming, that Osquery is streaming this data off, is that it has another Facebook product called RocksDB that it pools that data into, and then when it's time for the scheduled query to quote-unquote run, it's actively just writing that out to the log at that point. It's aggregating what you had in that cached DB, essentially, of RocksDB, which is more performant than asking SQLite to do it. It's just more SQLite is about the spec of the queries you're writing, not about the actual implementation of files on disk, the actual way that it's performing those actions. So the tip-off of how you would know what type of things, because it can't be everything. Nothing is, not many things in the system are set up with a subscribe type model that you can therefore publish those events from to get these events into a DB. You need that event publisher type relationship. The tables on Osquery IO, I should probably just like go ahead and do that. My bandwidth is going to be great, right? This is a live demo. What could go wrong? If you go to the docs link from Hello. Yeah. So there's this platform-specific ones, and then, for example, in Darwin, if we go far enough down that you have, I like the authorization mechanisms a lot, just because that was Tom Bergen. Shout out Tom Bergen. New York, so the disk events is a database tagged table, and therefore you can subscribe to things. I think it's improperly named because it actually does DMGs. They want to know if malware has pulled something down, mounted it, ran something malicious, and then the DMG went away. So there's metadata on those downloads that they would be able to track if they could only actually keep track of the fact that a mounting did occur. So that said, disk events. So all of these things that are event publisher driven, so file events, hardware events, process events, disk events, YARA events, and process file events requires a kernel extension that's only available internally at Facebook. They have not released that to the public, but a lot of people who are in the security field are like, really? You want me to install one more Kext? Really? One more launch agent job? I hate you. So a lot of people are suspicious of kernel extensions for security products. It just hasn't gotten to the point where they've released that so that you can look at files that are run by processes in an event stream. And this is a way that you can therefore catch those things, Osquery or it didn't happen, in between scheduled runs. And so you can make these queries run on any type of schedule, but to actually slurp them off into a local database and write them out, that will require that. This is the icon for when you need a kernel extension on that docs site. That's how you know that it requires that. Linux has a kernel extension as well that they use since this is on Facebook's servers. They have one or two. So we would think that it kind of works at scale as well. On a future version of the operating system that you therefore should not actually bank upon when it comes to this information, remember I said that there's this YARA events table. Well, early on, there was contributors to Osquery who made sure that this table exists. And at this path on a pre-release version of the operating system, it is now not necessarily that feed for XProtect updates that they said they were going to update from 10.7 to 10.8, and they just like abandoned that URL and stopped revving their update, yet it's still the most current version is up there. I'm a little scatterbrained right now. Pardon me if that didn't make any sense whatsoever. Get a buddy, ask a friend. But XProtect used to have an update feed that you would subscribe to. Now they're using YARA as their database of malicious software to quarantine with as XProtect acts upon it. Back to the 5 Centaur. So I had said, hey, Osquery D is what is able to take advantage of those events because it needs to be continuously running. You can't just do ad hoc Osquery I to be able to get these things that are in an event stream. So I hope that was understandable. When it comes to, all right, which end of this do I blow in? The packs for collections of queries. That's their terminology for a whole bunch of SQL. Here is what it actually looks like. Trust no one. If you want to disable signed apps from being auto-permitted to listen through the firewall, You have different concerns than me. I'm not actually worried about that as much. But for FileVault2, I talked about select encrypted from disk encryption join mounts on disk encryption.name equals mounts.device, where mounts. Yes, SQL, it's fun, right? That's why I use this very little in this presentation. So this is what a pack looks like when it comes to the SQL, the JSON format. I hate JSON. I made this one for the OS X lockdown project you may or may not be familiar with. But anyway, so that is there, and there's links from that. It is in the handout. Continuing with the distribution theme, Osquery can use a lighter weight set of flags. Instead of us just putting a launch daemon file and having launched all the options that you would need for doing a different type of distribution or different type of check-in for it, of how it was going to behave, you can use a TLS hook to receive, to have it check in for configs, and that with all those flags of options you would need for TLS, because there's cert setup that you would need to do, there's other type of behavior that you need to tell the system when you're going to use a TLS endpoint. You can also post those results up. So it can use that secure and well-trodden way of communicating over the WAN. If TLS is not clear enough, I'm talking HTTPS. Just throwing that out there. Gairaigo. Gairaigo. It's foreign, that came here words. Otherwise known as loan words, stuff that they borrowed from elsewhere in the world. So I talked about how oke refers to orchestra, so it's a common Western word. Anyone know what this is that is not Luis? Anyone know what this word is? Does that help? Amefto. And it's also like fto means fat. Say it again. Amefto. Amefto. That's right, American football. So my brother-in-law played American football in high school, even though it was not popular at all. Like rugby is more popular. And you know what they call what everywhere else in the world, like in the common sensible world, calls football, they call soccer? Like, I don't know where they even came up with that. But a bunch of weirdos. How's about this one? Anyone know what this refers to?
Poke the bear.
Poke the bear? Not, unfortunately, no. 50-50, should we phone a friend? Does that help? Not really, right? Right? It's kind of bizarre. Pocket bell. Pokeberu. Now, this only makes sense to like the parents in the audience. Number one, the people who actually know what that is. I work at a hospital. We still have these. Anyway, Pokemon, the pocket monster. Anyway. So my presentations aren't usually like this. Usually I start out with some redeeming quality / content so that you know you're in the right room. You want to get up, walk out, you can. Then I usually follow up with like, hey, here's more brass tacks so that all that whirlwind tour that I just went through, here's how to fully unpack and understand it. I think I've been methodic enough that maybe folks have been able to stick along with me through foundational info. And then like too much information, here you go. Like this is usually how I do. But this is how we were this time. This is our table of contents, only 35-ish slides in. I went over fundamentals. Now I'm going to go over the golden path / perfect tool set for most deployments. Hint, it's probably Zentral. I'm not going to steal more of Henry and Andy's fire. Doing security and services right. We'll follow that. Just a bit of a diversion because when we can say, hey, this will work for most places, we'll say, like, why won't it work for all? And then we're just going to do a quick tour. Besides Zentral, I mean, they don't need to, they want to talk about their product, right? There's other tools in the space that have existed around as long. And so I'll be getting started with just a quick intro to some of them. I haven't been able to demo all of them because there's more than a few. Some of them take a little bit to get going. So the golden path. Number one, you'll push your package of the Osquery install. We saw earlier in suspicious package. You might want to rename the LaunchD jobs from Facebook if you have people that are security paranoid. What is Facebook running LaunchD on my machine? Tinfoil hat, tinfoil hat. Then you can push down that config. With configuration management, you'll just push a whole bunch of queries down, and maybe that's all you need. Maybe you just get those going. Maybe you'll have a cert for login infrastructure or some other way that you'll ship them off the disk. That's the Moldovan flag. I wanted everybody to know that. Anyway. And then, two, you're going to aggregate that information you get back. You can take action on it. You can decide what's important to you. You can decide as things evolve where people have concerns like the Sparkle vulnerability. How many people have apps that use HTTP URLs? These are very performant ways to look in apps that are not just where Casper's going to look for them, because Casper's only looking in one place. Unless you tell it to look in other places, and those have to be exact paths. So the problem with the golden path, it can't necessarily fit all when it comes to things like security, privacy, and flexibility. So one deploy method is not necessarily for everyone. You might not want to install another agent for logging. You may not want the CM agent, the configuration management tools, or the certificate infrastructure and the certificate revocation lists and distributing that. Maybe that's too much overhead. From a threat modeling perspective, I wanted to take the craziest instance that I've ever heard of anyone deploying Osquery into account, and that is they don't really want to see all of the tables that are in Osquery. So the core developers don't consider shell history private information. They don't, because most likely on the masseuses and everybody else that they support at a very large multinational organization, they're not going into the shell to do common tasks. It's a probable thing. But browser history, that's considered an anti-pattern by the core developers. They don't want to use Osquery to check that. They don't want to know. So that is something that you can be sure of. They're not going to necessarily sneak into the project as things are announced. You'll see them in the release notes. But there's things you may want to leave out. If you think that browser history is not shell history is not something that you want to include, you can just drop that whole table from the package. So it's definitely not happening on machines. Process environment variables are another table in Osquery. If you're a developer that is letting secrets into your Docker config through environment variables, maybe you don't want those logged by Osquery. Just throwing that out there. I mean, sysadmins may even be a concern, certain sysadmins or developers of security products. The overhead of WAN-facing log aggregation, or cert infrastructure in general versus something more modern like JWT JSON web tokens. Like, there's new models that are emerging that make the way we have been doing things maybe look kind of, when are we going to change that and stop actually deploying things that way? But it really depends on your environment, and so I wanted to speak of security in general. The threat model that was most interesting to me was straight up BYOD for a company that does Bitcoin. You don't hear those two words in a sentence very often. A BYOD model for a company that... So a deployment model that will fit where the end users are updating the laptops themselves is just like mind-boggling to me. Yet, so therefore, the only agent they're using is Osquery. Now, this is MacDevOps. We want to choose something that will work for us, and we don't have a problem standing up infrastructure. We use models for software as a service, like a 12-factor app, where you have good exposed points that you can have a scalable, robust service. So which of the ones out there are we going to choose if it isn't that, OK, I'm just going to put some log aggregation on all of these nodes and collect it centrally? I mean, the other thing that people want to take into account when they're using Osquery in their environment to provide this security service is that it's not really going to replace antivirus, but wouldn't it be really awesome if it did? Because then, when you send a report to an antivirus vendor with a vuln and they unpack it and they crash their own mail server, that isn't the only use case that a lot of people do with Osquery, and they want to set up this system to be able to support that type of workflow. It's not just about replacing antivirus. And man, how many times are we going to have that conversation in the security channel of Slack this year? But OSSec is something very common. Now, this is me doing a lot of hand waving, by the way. Dropping buzzwords, do not have active interactions with these products. But OSSec is a very common framework. It was introduced in like 2006 for Linux servers at scale. When it comes to looking live over the WAN and doing instrumentation almost, being able to do the type of memory reads off of a machine out in the fleet, if you're going to do a hunt, Google Rapid Response, which the GRR stands for grrr, by the way. That is that type of tool. Osquery is not that type of tool. Yes, it's something you could set up which could deliver a lot of value if you're into setting up that type of infrastructure. Sysdig is another very well-respected up-and-coming tool, and Falco is one that that seems similar to OSSec. Again, little hand-wavy here, pardon me. But I want to take it back to like a little more base level. Okay? We're going to set up this system. We have customers, right? And they call us about printers and crawling underneath desks. The first step in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is making it work. Like being able to affect a change, to customize something for a deployment. The second is keeping it working, deploying it at scale. Keeping it from breaking anything else is usually a plus. Making changes without breaking it, actually being able to update your configs over time. If you're just doing it at deploy time with Deploy Studio, good for you, but once it's out there. Protecting against wrong changes. This is where we start to get into products that help us with configuration management and actual enforcement of security. Protecting against stupid users. I don't know who has those at their work, because I don't have any of those. Protecting against auditors. My security team, when they're wearing a suit, I know it's a great day. And protecting against attackers. You cannot actually Google this all that easily because their security certs expired. But there's a great post by Wendy Nather about that. So we're in the real world. We have all different types of customers, but really, until we deliver like up to like here, we're not worried about much else. And so I wanted to just level set that security, we should always think about our threat model, think about our priorities. Whereas developers, I don't know. I don't expect everyone to prioritize deploying Osquery. Danger, danger, danger. There may be lower hanging fruit to deal with first, but if you're in a situation where you have the luxury of being able to approach stuff like log aggregation, periodic privileged audits, that's something that a lot of folks do. You're making sure that all you're talking across the network is secured, your LDAP binding. I mean, then we move on to Osquery. Then we look at how we're going to actually respect our customers' privacy. That also mitigates our risk. If we take process environment variables from developers that have to do with creds on prod, and we put them in logging aggregation, maybe that's not the best of ideas. Just throwing that out there. So we need to like understand our entire model before we set these tools up, or at least have an evolving understanding of what's important to our environment. Back to the Japanese. I said they like shortening everything, right? What is this shortened in Japanese? Close. Banaripa. Banaripa. Like, it's also awesome because it's like Latin. They pronounce the vowel sounds all the same throughout words. It's actually not that hard to pronounce. Anyone know the reggae singer Shabba Ranks? Mr. Loverman, you know it is Mr. Lover. Shabba. This is Staba. They refer to that. Staba. That's who I hear in my head when anyone says Staba. How am I doing on time? We're coming down the home stretch. Don't worry. So I said management tools. I said logging infrastructure, that type of way is how most people go. And you can understand there's tools like ELK. When we say quite specifically logs, there's tools for that. When it comes to Osquery's newer model, newer way of doing things, first to go over what may be an approximation of what Facebook does internally, and I know they do not. not what Facebook actually uses. A chef cookbook like this could be used across multiple platforms. Originally, this chef cookbook from the supermarket that you get out with your knife, it used homebrew for packaging. And I was kind of like, you were making it so easy to make fun of you. But they have since moved to really using the package releases. They might aggregate some of this data from Osquery with Splunk, but not anymore. No, they don't actually use this product. But they are therefore having a pretty complete circuit. If they all had always-on VPN for when they were shipping these logs. Like, there's so many ways in which, if you have those resources, if you have a way of solving this problem to get the configurations onto the machine, including those packs to run all those queries, those launch daemons to get them scheduled, and the logging infrastructure to aggregate them, maybe you're all set. That's all reasonable, well, and good. But besides Zentral coming up, it's going to be good. I'm going to speak about 3 systems. One is still in beta and written in Go, super flashy. One is like a lot of systems that you think about, like GitHub itself was originally written in Ruby on Rails, very web appy type of way. And then a third, a scalable Python Flask architecture designed by security engineers. I'm going to call that one the Volvo. You'll see what I mean. So Collide, you log into it. All it is right now is a lot of Flash because, man, is it good looking. You have a query that you want to run. You can load more queries in. Then you get the results of your nodes. You can rename them from the UUIDs that they're tagged with as they report in, because we don't really care about necessarily registration. There's a whole bunch of things missing from this workflow. But Collide is one to watch, one to look at. It's definitely a work in progress because you can't actually rename these things yet. There's actually no authentication system behind the login logout at this point. But just wanted to throw that out there as, if you want to just demo stuff quickly, it acts as if it's PHP MySQL for your nodes on the WAN. It's totally crazy. It's like mind-altering. Like, dude. And it's written in Go, of course. So Victor's happy about that. So Groob is happy. Windmill. That was announced last year at B-Sides NOLA, I believe was the conference. Scott Roberts and the other gentleman from Heroku, pardon me that I don't remember your name. This is, I have no pictures of the interface. You can click the one button to deploy to Heroku from the README, and I'm kind of like, all right, but I just did not have the time to go over it. It can, as of publicly committed today, because I reminded them that they said it in the README last year, it can take the TLS results that are sent to it and forward it straight through to log aggregation. So this can be, instead of the ELK interface being open on the WAN or something like that, for you to take Elasticsearch, Logsesh, Kibana output, or that system's ingest directly, you can forward it through Windmill, and you're distributing out those configs with this product. Then there is Doorman. It's a bootstrap wrapped, imagine that, management console to apply queries to these UUID tagged nodes and perform ad hoc one-off runs. So not only can you distribute out those regular packs and such, you can do one-off distributed queries is how it's referred to. Now, the lack of identifiability or inventory state in general might be considered a plus to them. They have a very low limit, I think, before they start purging, because they don't really want to hold on to historical data. That's not what this is necessarily for. And this is that person who has the super interesting to me constraint of BYOD machines. But there are other places using this, like Stripe, who I really wish wasn't the same as Square. What's up? On my thumbs up, Stripe. That Red Stripe? No. As Square, I wish they weren't so closely named in both in financial services, but it is Stripe that helps out with the deployment of this, besides another company. However, for me, I did not demo this one. It was not quite so easy on the eyes. It has no grouping except for tags. However, let's take us home, Keyboard Cat. those were those three. So you had Collide, very flashy. You had Windmill, GitHub, and Heroku. And you have the Volvo. Lots of people are looking forward to Doorman's continued development, and they're very much looking at contributors. Disclaimer, what have I deployed person who is giving you this talk as if they're authoritative on this topic? Ad hoc queries via the JSS. So confession time. I spoke about those methods at the Philly Mac Admins Prezzo in the handout. I have Puppet up. All I really need is that logging stack to do, as Facebook and many other companies that make the internets have done. I would probably need logging infra anyway. But development of these management tools, which I'd much rather they be mature before I need necessarily to rush into logging infrastructure, I'm hoping that that actually overtakes me before I get there. The development of Osquery itself is a journey which is 1% complete. And so I'm hoping that folks who see the value of these tools, see the value of Osquery and how you can do like the Center for Internet Security pack, things like that, to help you audit your data and get responses about your fleet. You should give feedback, file issues, and help both the tools that you need if they look interesting for your deployment ideas and Osquery itself so that everybody else can benefit from it as well. So it's the, what do they call McDonald's in Japan? Remember, we're shortening everything. Anybody? MacDo. MacDo. But this guy? Some people might know this, because this was on the internet of like, I'm gonna blow your mind, dude. Donaldo. If you take nothing else from this presentation, know that Ronald McDonald, imagine that guy's name starts with R, is Donaldo in Japan. I have no idea why, but thank you very much for putting up with me. And I did okay for time, huh? Is this like we still have extra time for Q&A, or is that it?
Thank you, Allister.
That's too. If you don't have any questions, I'm glad to skedaddle off the stage.
Any questions for Allister?
Yes, sir.
The database, like what kind of maintenance is there built into Osquery to maintain its own database?
On the local systems. So RocksDB is an in-memory store. You rebooted, you've cleared, you've purged that. RocksDB does have a PID that you're going to be managing with flags. So if you need more persistence out of, say, a TLS endpoint that's like, hey, you haven't run these queries yet, and you've already done some of this logging, and we need you to be more persistent, it'll write that out. But there's no maintenance from a client management perspective because it uses this performant way that can also write quickly to disk during shutdown. I pulled that out of my butt entirely. I have no idea whether or not that's true. But it sounds really authoritative, right? There's a Slack, herokuapp.com. Let's definitely on the Osquery Slack ask the developers themselves. Because I know that there is no maintenance involved, but I don't know that RocksDB has that persistence across reboots. Sir?
Question. Where did your GitHub username come from? What's the origin of that?
So my name is Allister, and Al is Aru. And des means it is, but like, or you'll like, when you announce yourself, you'll say des, or like when you'll announce something, it's like, owari desu, you'll say I'm done, right? My last initial is B, so aribi desu. Secret, mystery revealed.
It looked like it shared the same root as
Arubaito?
short-term job.
Yeah, worker? No, not so much. Aribi desu.